Gotham City was no stranger to the practice of occultism. Rumors and stories told of a secret order of occultists that had been in power since Gotham's founding. These stories lent to superstitions that carried over throughout Gotham's history, even into the late 1800s. There were many that tried to invoke these occult practices to gain power. James Craddock, Nikolai Tepes, and William McElroy, to name a few. Out of all of these people, however, none were so prominent as Joseph Blackfire. Blackfire was a transitional deacon in the Catholic Church. He hoped to enter the priesthood upon completing his training in seminary. He had been in Gotham City his entire life. As a young man, Blackfire was drawn to the spiritual. It spoke to him of a world beyond our own. Finding more knowledge of this world became his obsession. Over the years, Blackfire's desire for knowledge evolved into a desire for otherworldly power. He began to dabble in occult practices and rituals, careful to keep them a secret from his superiors. These rituals, divination, spells involving grimoires and magic weapons, were attempts to gain otherworldly power. Eventually, he was found out and severely reprimanded. Blackfire was stripped of his diaconate, laicized and expelled from active involvement in the church. Blackfire was enraged by this turn of events. He considered his superiors to be fools, obstinate towards change, and much too set in their ways. Now free of his attachment to the church, Blackfire felt free to truly delve into his occult practices. He began to hold seances and practice ceremonial magic. Blackfire sought to gain power through any means that he could. As he explored these further, he began to amass a small following. Blackfire reasoned that they would begin their own organization, and preached to his followers that they followed the true will of God. Blackfire told his disciples that through magic, they would gain enlightenment, and anything would be possible, even their darkest desires. With the official start of the planning for the Gotham World Fair, Blackfire saw a new opportunity. His followers grew in number with each passing day, but he wanted to obtain a larger platform from which to preach his message. He petitioned the Gotham City Council for a spot at the fair. Many of the council members were wary of him. One such person was Professor Hugo Strange. Strange called Blackfire's followers brainless fanatics, and he accused Blackfire of being a confidence man. Blackfire was laughed out of the council chambers. Seething inwardly, but keeping a composed exterior, Blackfire gathered his followers. He instructed them in a ritual, one that he claimed would result in the destruction of their enemies. He told his followers that God was on their side and would remove their obstacles. In this instance, it was Professor Hugo Strange. After they had completed the ritual, they waited. Blackfire insisted that it would result in Strange's death. For the first few days, nothing happened. For the first 2 weeks, nothing happened. Blackfire began to worry that it hadn't worked. Blackfire's followers began to doubt that anything would happen to Strange, until Strange was murdered in his own home by Dr. Pamela Isley. When this news reached them, Blackfire immediately capitalized on it and claimed that they had manifested this occurrence. He used it to garner trust from his followers, and his cult began to grow more and more. When he next petitioned the city council, they begrudgingly accepted his proposal. They supposed that maybe an element of spirituality would bring a sense of whimsy to the otherwise scientific aspects of the fair. Harold Faulkner, another city council member, still strongly opposed it. Mayor Sharp seemed somewhat taken with the idea. He was one of the loudest voices of support for Blackfire on the council. Unlike most other exhibitions at the fair, Blackfire held his showcases at nighttime. His followers would put up flyers promoting his sermons, and guests would come to experience them. Large crowds gathered to listen to him preach. Blackfire would tell them that they could seize control of their lives through supernatural means. The crowds ate it up at first, but over time, the novelty of it seemed to wear off. The crowds stopped coming, and their interest in Blackfire faded. This put Blackfire in a grim mood. His followers watched in confusion as he locked himself in a room. He spent restless days and nights devising a solution. When he emerged, Blackfire told them of his plan. When Blackfire returned to the public eye, his message was different this time. When he preached his message, to a smaller crowd, he told them that he had received knowledge from God about the future. Deacon Blackfire claimed that Harold Faulkner, the city councilor, would die in 2 days' time. Non-believers scoffed at this claim as Blackfire conducted a public magic ritual. The news outlets began to cover the story. Faulkner had spearheaded a few small redevelopment projects. His name was well known by Gotham citizens. Faulkner was furious upon hearing this claim. He contacted Commissioner Gordon and told him to do something about Blackfire. Gordon told the city councilor that he would assign some men to watch the councilor's house, but he could not do much more than that. 2 days passed. When the councilor awoke the following morning, he sat at the breakfast table with his family. They all watched in horror as Faulkner began to cough up blood. Within minutes, he was dead. As word of this incident spread, Blackfire's popularity grew. People were appalled that he had seemingly predicted the city councilor's death. Deacon Blackfire again capitalized on this. The police were immediately suspicious that Blackfire had been somehow responsible for Faulkner's death, but they couldn't prove it. Blackfire continued to accurately predict the deaths of at least 2 more public figures in Gotham. Commissioner Gordon, with his hands tied, turned to the Batman. Finding the reason for the deaths proved to be a difficult task. The Batman had many theories, but his primary one was that the deaths had been because of poison. He utilized techniques pioneered by Gene Stoss, a toxicologist, to study the bodies of the people whose deaths Blackfire had predicted. It did not take long for the Batman to discover a common link in all the deaths. They had been poisoned. He theorized that Deacon Blackfire had poisoned them under the guise of performing public magical rituals. After investigating more, the Batman found out how the poison had been administered. It seemed that Blackfire had his most trusted followers bribe certain members of each victim's house staff. The house staff would either administer the poison themselves or allow one of Blackfire's followers to pose as a staff member. The Batman obtained this information through the interrogation of one of the members of Blackfire's inner circle, a cultist who was Blackfire's right hand. As the Batman gathered evidence and built a case, he passed the information along to the police. He managed to gather this just in time. Blackfire's latest prediction was that James Gordon would die. Before Blackfire could perform the ceremonial ritual, both the police and the Batman sprang into action. Blackfire's followers began fighting against the police, and the Batman went for Blackfire himself. After an intense scuffle, Deacon Blackfire and his cultists were subdued. They had been responsible for at least 3 deaths. Blackfire and his inner circle of followers were sentenced to life in Blackgate Penitentiary. At his trial, Blackfire told all present that nothing would stop him, not even death. He claimed he would take vengeance on all of them, and that God's wrath would rain down on them. He was met with laughter, but Blackfire stood silently as they all laughed. Blackfire and his cult were locked up, and the newspapers covered the story. Gotham citizens were shocked that someone who claimed the title of Deacon could be involved in something so despicable. The name of Deacon Joseph Blackfire would become infamous, and his threat of vengeance would also be seared into Gotham's memory.